Hey everybody, welcome back. We've got a video today specifically designed for you first-time econometrics students who are being asked to put together your very first data project using Stata, right? So the idea specifically in this video is to walk through putting together kind of a development economics cross-sectional data set using World Bank data. So if you've seen some of my other videos, I've used this data source a lot. It's easily accessible. Everybody can look into it, but it's also great for this purpose. So question for you guys, how many of you are in that situation? I'm always curious to hear from you guys. Are you a first-time econometrics undergraduate student? If that's the case, leave a note in the comments. I'll be curious to see what the results are. So here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. Again, putting ourselves in the shoes of a first-year introductory econ student, we want to be able to think about a usable but fairly basic hypothetical data generating process, right? What is the model that we're going to try to gather data to replicate and estimate? So we'll think that through a little bit, again, in an example suitable to this data that we're going to look at. Then we'll go and look at the World Bank Open Data website to get an idea of what variables are available there and how best to obtain them. And then we'll see exactly in Stata how to gather that data, how to clean it up, and be able to get that, put our best foot forward in terms of getting that project started. Okay. So, again, be creative here. When you're out there coming up with a project topic for your econometrics class. So for my example that we'll look at here, we might want to think about how can we relate different explanatory variables to varying degrees of poverty across different countries. So our Y variable, our dependent variable, might be some measure of poverty. And we'll look at kind of the data, what's available there. And then we want to think about what is a key variable that we think might cause variation in poverty. And we might think education, right? So some measure of educational attainment on average within an economy, that might be a good treatment variable to put on the right-hand side of that equation. And then you're going to want to fill out your data set with a reasonable list of control variables. So we want to think about other factors that might affect poverty and might be associated with education, so we can partial those out and get a reasonable proximity of a causal inference on that B1 coefficient. So this is when we can really start to think, and again, if this is your kind of first introductory course, you're probably not going to be held to a super high standard here, but you want to be able to think about things like income inequality, infrastructure, government effectiveness, geography, institutions, trade, immigration, financial structure, all these things that set one economy apart from another. So this is a sticking point for a lot of students your first time through. How do you come up with an econometric topic to write a paper when you haven't learned econometrics yet? So I always recommend a good place to start is just kind of the popular economics literature, right? So here, this is from last year's Nobel Prize winners, Banerjee and Duflo, Good Economics for Hard Times. They pose not only kind of the classic questions in development economics and some innovative answers, they pose a lot of different questions and give some interesting empirical examples of how to approach that. So just kind of thinking about what are the big picture questions. Amartya Sen, this one's quite old, almost 20 years old now, but also a Nobel Prize winner. And then go look, say, at the National Bureau of Economic Research, their working paper series. Again, if this is your first go through with econometrics, you're not really going to have the tools to replicate exactly what you see in those papers, but just to give you an idea of what are the questions that can be addressed with these types of data-driven techniques. So for our purposes, let's imagine we've landed on this hypothetical model that we want to construct. So what we want to construct now is a data set that conforms to that model. And in our situation, we want to keep it simple, so a cross-sectional data set. So we want to have all the observations gathered at the same point in time, but varying at the national level across different economies. So it might look something like this as a spreadsheet, right? So we've got different countries. We have our Y variable, say poverty rate, and then we would fill out values for some measure of educational attainment, and then we would have a new column for each of those X control variables that we've decided upon. And the idea being we want to have at least 50 observations in our data set to run reasonably useful regressions. And in addition to our Y variable and our key treatment variable, in this case that's poverty and education respectively, we would like to have at least 3 control variables, again, to give us some meaningful results. So that's what we want to try to accomplish. And in this example, where we're going to get that data is, again, from the World Bank. So here we have the link, and I'll put this in the description, and that'll take you to the World Bank Open Data website. And lots of stuff going on here, but what we want to do is just click here. We want to browse by indicator, right? Because we don't want data for one specific country, even though we could do that. We're imagining here a cross-sectional approach. So by indicator is variable by variable across all the different countries. Okay, so when you click on that browse by indicator, this lets us kind of create a little menu to search through. So on the right hand side you see all these different topics, and within each of those topics, for example the top one, agricultural and rural development, we have a list of available indicators. These are the variables that have been constructed for us. So if you recall, our example dependent variable was a measure of poverty. Well, they have a whole section on poverty here. So if we click on that, we've got a bunch of different things going on, a lot of them related to income distribution, so Gini coefficient, percent of income held by different quartiles of the population. So lots of things to choose from here. And we might think about something like this. So poverty headcount ratio at $1.90 per day as a percent of the population. So what percent of the population is living below that kind of extreme poverty line? So let's take that as an example. So we click on that, and it's going to give us this little graph of kind of the overall aggregate value across different years. And then if we scroll down, it's going to give us the values, the most recently available numbers for each country. All that. And if we actually had to load that into Stata or a spreadsheet by hand, that would be kind of a mess. But we're not going to have to do that. So click on details here for our variable. And it's got a nice description of exactly where the data came from, what it represents. But for our purposes right now, what we want is this little ID code. So we're going to take that, and here's what I would suggest, is just copy that, and then move over to, say, Word or a Google Doc, and we're going to paste that in. So we have the code for the variable that we want, right? So this is our Y variable, this is our poverty rate variable, and there's the code, right? So next we're going to go get education. So we kind of pre-populate that, and let's go back to the website, back to the menu, there we go, and we had that category here of education. So same thing, there's a lot of different indicators that represent different measures of educational attainment. So we've got literacy rate, government expenditure per student. That sounds pretty good. Government expenditure on total expenditure on education. How about this as percent of GDP expenditure per student? That sounds like a good measure that could separate different countries. So let's click on that and do the same thing. Click on details and grab that course, the indicator ID code, paste it in here. So this is educational expenditure. And And as I mentioned, we want to have variables that have at least 50 observations, right, for a given year. One thing we're going to find is a lot of these variables sound really good, but have a lot of missing observations. A lot of countries just didn't report values for these specific indicators. So we might want to have a backup plan here. So literacy rate for adult males 15 and above, maybe that would be a good indicator. Primary completion rate, student-teacher ratios. These are all good indicators for kind of educational attainment. So how about, let's just try the adult male literacy rate. Let's grab that as an additional education variable. And we could even include both of them since they are really measuring slightly different things here. So let's grab that ID. You see how this goes, right? So this is how you spend about 2/3 of your time when you're putting together a data project. So here's our literacy rate. And then now we would get into our control variable. So I won't walk through that, but the process is exactly the same, right? So you'd want to think through of all of those categories, right? Where do you want to go to look for additional variables? You'd want to have at least 3 more variables, right? But now once we have those codes, and if we have those for all of our variables that we want, we can really now set aside the World Bank website and go right into Stata. Right? So the first thing we want to do is install this World Bank Open Data command that links together our Stata and that World Bank data source. Right? So I already have it installed here, but the command is ssc install. So this is a command or a package that's not built in to Stata. It's an aftermarket edition. There's a lot of those that can do a lot of good work for us. So ssc install wb open data. And as that works its way through, for me it's just double checking that it's already installed. The next thing we're going to do once that's installed is use that command. So I have the kind of the generic version of the command here. So it's just wb open data, comma, and then indicator, and then in parentheses we list out those codes that we've developed. And you can have as many of them as variables that you want. As long as they're separated by a semicolon, we'll be in good shape. So I'm not going to worry about all of that. Everything is already there for me. Okay. So our command here, wb open data, comma, indicator, and then parentheses, and then bear with me, I'm going to go back to the Word file, and we're going to copy each of these and put them into our command. So our first one, semicolon, back over our first education variable, copy, paste. I know this is thrilling video. There we go. And then this next option here, the clear option, you've got to include that whenever you're downloading multiple indicators. Otherwise, it'll try to stack them on top of each other, and Stata's not going to let you do that. And then the long option, not so much a big deal here, but it's going to make things a lot easier the way it's going to construct the data. So let's go ahead and hit enter there. And it's going to take a second to populate the data set, but once it does, we should see all of the kind of boilerplate variables drop in along with our 3 variables. So everything up here, you see country code, country name, region, region name, admin, region name, income level, all the way down here to year. Those are always going to be there, right? So anytime you download any variable using this command, those are all going to be there to give us kind of an idea of which country, which year and what are the characteristics of that country, and then we have our individual data here. So whenever you download data, before you do anything with it, I'm old school, I always just use the browse command first thing. So by browsing the data, it's going to bring up the spreadsheet view. And here, so what we see, Aruba is the first country listed. And you see it listed a whole bunch of times. That's because the data goes back to 1960, right? At least hypothetically. So Aruba should have observations from 1960 every year up to 2019. But you see all these dots, those are all missing observations, right? So the space is there for the data, it just was never collected and never uploaded, right? So that's always going to be an issue. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, that's just the way it goes, right? So then we go country by country all the way down, dot, 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 and now we see some values that are not missing. So we have the potential for something here. The next thing you want to do is, in this case, maybe we should wait on this realistically to make sure that the data is actually going to work. But because we have these codes that are kind of hard to read, right? You don't want to have to memorize which is which, especially if you have a dozen different variables. Before you get too far, you probably want to just rename those variables, right? So that's the command. It's just rename, and then you put in the old name, and then a space, and then whatever you actually want to call it. So this is our poverty variable. And now it shows up as poverty, right? So now I can call it up and know exactly what it is. You'll see it in graphs and regression output, etc. So that's a good next step. You do that for our education variables as well. And then the next thing you want to do is just summarize the data. So SUM, this looks bad, right? So you have 0 observations for all of these variables. Well, the reason for that is, you noticed when we browsed the data, the font was all in red, right, for those country name, country code, etc. That simply means it's being read as text by Stata. So it's not, we're not able to get any statistical information out of that, and we're not supposed to. So that's read as 0 observations. The variables that we care about, the numerical year, and then our poverty, and then our education variables. They've got over 1,000 observations each, but again, those are across multiple years. So the next step is to figure out what is the most recent year for which we have a reasonable number of observations. So here you can do a sum if command. So let's summarize the data if the year is, say 2016. So this gives us the number of observations, the mean, standard deviation, min, max for our variables just for that 1 year for 2016. And so again, there's what, 190 something countries in the world. We've got 76, 94, and 74 observations within our sample here. So that's not bad, right? So if we decide that that's the year that we want, and for most purposes, again, we do want to have it the most recent available, then we could go ahead and get rid of everything else, right? If that's the only year's data we're going to use in the subsequent analysis, we can just say, let's keep only if the year is equal to 2016. And don't forget 2 equal signs to make that work for us. So now we just lost 15,000 observations, but now if we just type in sum, we only have the observations for 2016. And if we go browse our data again, we'll see each country now only appears 1 time because it's only 1 year's worth of data. So much more work to be done, but this walks you through how to set up your data, how to think about the process a little bit, and now you're ready to roll. So if you have any questions on kind of what comes next, put them in the comments. There'll be subsequent videos just like this for different data sources, so if you're not super interested in kind of country-level cross-sectional development questions and you still have to put together your project, don't worry, there's more on the way. So, see you guys next time. Thanks a lot.